Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things here, and today I'm with Roman Pichler. How are you, Roman Pichler?
I'm all right. Thank you very much. Nice to be with you, Tony.
And you notice I used your full name. I just wanted to give you a bit of gravitas and title there for this particular one, because I've been looking forward to having you on for some time, and it's taken us a while to organise this, so I'm really happy to have you. For those that don't know you, Roman, would you like to do a little bit of an intro and let everybody know where you came from and your background?
Yeah, sure. So, yes, I'm Roman. and the work I do is trying to help product people improve the way they work and advise organizations in improving their product management organization, their product management function. And so I've got a strong background in agile software development, and I've been working with product people now for a long time, close to 20 years. And so it's really the intersection between agility and product management, you could say. That's the area I'm particularly specialized in. And in recent years, I've started to focus on topics like strategy, product strategy, and product leadership. So those are particular areas of my interest.
Brilliant. And the reason I really wanted to have you on, like, as I said to you off air, I don't know how we haven't crossed paths over the years. It just never quite happened. But, I've known of you for a long time, and you have a very similar background to myself. You came from, extreme programming, where we were just chatting. There wasn't too much around at the time. It was that early days of agility, and we had the Kent Beck white book, so shout out to Kent Beck. But and then the necessity as you spanned and started to business agility-eyes, if that's a word, with the organisation, Scrum became important, and along with that premise became really that product owner role, product ownership that we all sort of started to gravitate towards, and I fulfilled that role myself. So, that was the conversation I'm really looking forward to today, is really having that conversation on the product owner, where you see empowerment for that role now, because it's been around a while and we really know what it should be, yet is it as empowered, and do they get the opportunity for those strategic product decisions? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Tony. And it's a funny one because, as you said, the product owner role's been around for a long time. Emerged within the Scrum framework, as you mentioned, and it's been, I think, it's been, in theory, it should have been fairly well understood, since it was described in the book Agile Software Development with Scrum by Ken Schwaber and the late Mike Beadle, and I think that was published in 2002. So it's like, wow, 20 years, right? But still, just like you, I find there's quite a bit of confusion around who should be the product owner, who should play this role, what's the role all about, what kind of level of decision making, of authority, of empowerment does a product owner require. And when you go back to the source, when you look at the Scrum Guide and see what the Scrum Guide says about the product owner role, then I believe it suggests that the product owner is responsible or even accountable for maximizing the value of a product. Now, maximizing the value of a product or being responsible for achieving product success, to me, sounds like pretty much a traditional product management responsibility, the responsibility I would traditionally associate with a product manager. And that's kind of interesting for me to observe, because obviously Scrum as a framework is very much focused on helping teams develop complex products. So, I would suggest that it has, in a way, a development focus, and it doesn't really offer that many tools and techniques for product people. Yes, there is a product backlog. Yes, there's the idea that items in the product backlog evolve. Yes, there's the idea that we build products in an incremental manner and are able to gather feedback early and regularly from users, customers, and internal stakeholders, and thereby correct decisions and make the right product decisions and hopefully offer the best possible product. But, other product management techniques and tools, like, for instance, a product roadmap or product strategy or key performance indicators, all those good things, they're not part of the framework. And I think that has led people to believe that the product owner role must be a more tactical role, and it must be more like a project manager, or somebody who works with development teams and writes user stories and takes care of the product backlog, makes the product backlog look pretty, and ensures that the development teams do a good job.
We see that all the time, right? We see that all the time, and it's a real contention issue.
It is, yes. And I think personally, I believe that's that sort of element of confusion. How much decision-making power does a product owner have, and what kind of role really is the product owner? I think that confusion's been there for a long time. I remember Rich Smirnov, who is a product management author and consultant and teacher, and I very much respect Rich's work. He's also a very nice guy, I should say. Wrote an article way back, that must have been 2006, 2008-ish, about the big and the small product owner, where he tried to describe the different perspectives, the different interpretations, takes on the role. So the big product owner would be somebody who is more like a traditional product manager, is empowered to make strategic decisions, and the small product owner would be more like a tactical product owner. And then, in recent years, we've had, partly due to the popularity of the SAFe framework, scaled agile framework, I think an even stronger tendency to see the product owner role as a more tactical role. As in the SAFe framework, the role is redefined, reinterpreted as somebody who does take care of the backlog, or a team backlog, part of a backlog, and works with the development teams. And it's very much a delivery focused role. That's at least my understanding. And an inward focused, whereas then, a SAFe product owner would be an outward focused role that takes care of the strategic decisions. So for me, when I think about the product owner role, I really think about somebody, certainly in a Scrum context. So when I think about the Scrum product owner, I think about somebody who has to be empowered to make not only tactical decisions, not only help shape the product backlog and help discover the right product backlog items and refine those items, and then change and adapt those items based on the feedback gathered. But I also think about somebody who's empowered to make the strategic decisions. And so somebody who has what I like to refer to as full stack ownership. And if you think about a simplified version of Mike Cohn's planning onion, with like vision and strategy and tactics, and vision is the big overarching goal of our product, the positive change we'd like to bring about, aspirational, inspiring goal. And then we have the strategy, that's essentially the path that we'd like to choose in order to achieve product success and make progress towards our vision. And maybe the strategy covers things like the market segment, the value proposition, standout features, business goals. Maybe also there's a product roadmap that then contains product goals, specific benefits the product should provide over the next 6 to 12 months. So for me, a product owner should also take care of those decisions and ultimately own those plans, those planning artifacts. I'm not saying a product owner should necessarily make those decisions on their own, but I think in a Scrum context, in order to be truly able to maximize the value a product creates, a product owner must be involved and must be, I would say, leading the strategic decision-making processes. So I think it's very difficult if you say you're a Scrum product owner, but you look after the product backlog and somebody else decides on the product strategy and the big picture. It's like, well, how's that possible? Then how can the person then truly achieve product success? I don't think that's feasible.
I agree with you, and yet we still come across. I'm going to pick up on something you said there that I like. I'm going to steal that. Full stack product owner. I like that description of it, because I think what's come about, and you're right. Now organizations have a product manager, they have a product owner, and they have a Scrum master, or whatever that may be called. And the poor product manager the product owner is caught in the middle of this and not empowered to do X or Y, and ends up questioning the value that they can bring to the team, right? And that's the first thing I start talking to them about is, well, why is the product owner who literally is the person there, or why are they not empowered to do that? And you talk about some of those tools that they need. I think that's interesting to hear about as well, right?
Yeah, no, I'm glad that what I said resonates with you. I'm lost now.
Sort of thinking more about tools, the tools
and
enable themselves.
I think there was something I wanted to say about the work split between the product manager and the product owner. Yes, initially I couldn't stop myself from talking, right? And now I'm lost for words. The thing I wanted to mention is that I've always thought of, at least a Scrum product owner, I've always thought of the role as a product manager in an agile context. So I've always equated the Scrum product owner to an agile product manager, essentially. And so for me, the idea of seeing a Scrum product owner as a purely tactical delivery focused role has always been kind of strange, I have to say. Now, I do understand why some organizations use a setup of having a strategic outward-facing product manager and then an inward-facing tactical delivery oriented product owner, but that's a way often either to accommodate the current organizational structure and not having to make any form of organizational development. So, ensure their stability and continuity, or quite often I find it's a scaling technique to be able to allow a group of people to work together on a larger product that is feature rich and involves maybe several teams, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams. And so then sometimes, people say like, oh, what the SAFe framework suggests, let's have somebody who's in charge of the overall product, more strategic. Then let's have people who are in charge of the tactical work, the product backlog, or the various parts of the product backlog. And in certain circumstances, that setup, I think, can be useful and can make a lot of sense. But there are also scenarios where it doesn't make sense. And it generally doesn't make sense, in my experience, for as long as a product experiences a significant amount of change and uncertainty, particularly as long as the product strategy is not stable or hasn't stabilized, as long as there's volatility around the product strategy. And the worst thing in a way that can happen is when you have that split between a strategic product role and a tactical product role, that strategic decisions do not guide the tactical ones, and strategy is not being properly implemented. And at the same time, insights from the delivery work, the tactical work, doesn't help to evolve and adapt the strategy. And I think that's a real shame, right? Because what you want is, you really want to connect those two ultimately work streams, a strategic discovery work stream and a tactical delivery work stream. So again, they feed each other and they enrich each other, and not that they're separated, not that there's a chasm. So yeah, that's why I think, as helpful as it might be, or as natural as it might feel in some organizations to have that split, it's worthwhile reflecting on if it's really helpful, if it's truly beneficial for a given product or a given product portfolio, and then think about possibly adapting and changing it. The other thing that you touched upon, the tools, I think it's just important, particularly for those watching and listening who have a strong agile or Scrum background, to be aware that there are other tools for product owners, certainly Scrum product owners, in addition to the product backlog. So I mentioned the vision and the product strategy, and I think it's the vision's been, I guess, recognized in a Scrum context for a long time as something that's probably useful for product people, even though it doesn't form part of the Scrum framework, as far as I know. Again, vision would be the reason for creating a product, the positive change you want to bring about, as an inspirational goal that aligns stakeholders and development teams and hopefully creates some forward momentum, is inspirational to a certain extent. So an example I like to use is healthy eating for a product that helps people, say, to live with type 2 diabetes, or avoid developing type 2 diabetes, reduce the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So healthy eating might be a good vision. And then you've got the strategy, the product strategy, that says, how are we going to realize the vision? How are we going to achieve product success? And as I briefly mentioned earlier, I like to then think about who are the beneficiaries of the product, who are the users, who are the customers, what's the specific problem that the product should solve, or the specific benefit it should offer. So the problem it should address is developing type 2 diabetes, or reducing the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And then the beneficiaries might be middle-aged men like myself, who've maybe developed unhealthy eating habits over the years. And then I also like to think about business goals. What are the specific benefits that the product offers to the business? And that could be revenue, or increasing revenue. It could be reducing costs. It could be increasing productivity. It could be achieving a certain profit margin. It could also be developing the brand. But there has to be an impact ultimately to the business. And we have to be able in one way or another to measure it and quantify it. And I think it's important to call that out, because for me, a product is a value creating vehicle, something that creates value for users, possibly customers, and at the same time for the business. And as we know, all businesses only have limited resources. There's only limited time, energy, and money. And I think so we've got to be able to make wise decisions about, which assets we invest in, which products we develop, and which products we continue to enhance, and which ones we don't.
Yeah, that's an important thing.
It is.
It's an interesting counterbalance as well. I think the good product owners that I've worked with over the years, and if you're listening, you'll know who you are. One of the great tools, I think, or techniques that they had was to be able to translate that vision and that strategic roadmap into the actual teams that are doing the work, so they understand the connect. The other thing that one of the first product owners I worked with who was really good, I was the coach and the scrum master at the time, dual role hat, and the contention between the two of us, people used to say, you're like the two old men in the Muppets sitting up in that box, Waldorf and Stanley. But at the end of it, you actually come out going, okay, now we know where we're going, because we would counterbalance each other with that strategic intent, what the customer needs, but what can the team actually do, and what some of those considerations. And I think that's a gap that I see at the moment, a lot. What's your thoughts on that, Roman?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great observation. And for me, there are in a way two solutions. One solution is to really unite the strategic and tactical product decision making in one person. And for me, that's the original idea behind the Scrum product owner, as I've mentioned before. And of course, this only scales. A single person taking charge of a product in its entirety and having full stack ownership only scales to a certain extent. Various people have different ideas how large a product can be that one person can manage, and how many development teams one product person can work with. But certainly I think it's useful for brand new products and young products that haven't achieved product market fit, that essentially haven't become successful, to consider having one person in charge of that product, and again and then owning the product in its entirety, having that full stack ownership. So that's one thing. The other solution for me is, and I think you've kind of touched upon it, is to find a way to systematically connect the vision to the day-to-day work of the teams. Now, there probably are different approaches available. Personally, I've struggled with this challenge for many, many years. And, part of what I've done over the past 5, 6, 7 years was developing a model, a framework that is one way how you can essentially systematically connect your sprint goals to your vision, or how you systematically can derive sprint goals ultimately from your vision. And I don't necessarily want to go into a lot of detail right now, but it's sort of it's a model that starts with a vision, and then that's translated into a product strategy. Kind of already touched upon that, and then the strategy is translated into a product roadmap. So the ultimately the user customer goals or needs, the problem statement in the strategy, and the business goals are broken down into mid-term product goals. So maybe 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months goals that are now not only specific but also measurable. And then these product goals, and that's in line with the current Scrum guide, are then broken into sprint goals. And so you get then essentially a chain of goals, and you get a chain of planning artifacts. It all kind of, it all syncs up if you do it in the right way. And if you kind of keep those artifacts and those goals connected, which means, it's not only a top-down process, but it's also a bottom-up process. So if you fail to meet your sprint goals, you may have to adapt your product goal. If you have to adapt your product goal, you may have to change or modify your product roadmap. And if the product roadmap significantly changes, well, that may have an impact on the product strategy. So it's then about establishing an inspect and adapt process, not only on a delivery or tactical level, but also on a strategic level, and regularly reviewing the strategy and the roadmap using the insights gained from the tactical work, in addition to, say, market changes, new competitors appearing on the scene, new trends, or business changes. So for me, it's those two elements that can help us, you know, connect the day-to-day work of the development teams with the vision, so that the vision actually guides that work.
Does something, yeah. So what I like about what you've done as well, so shout out to the viewers who are listening, you've actually, on your website, which we'll talk about later, but you've actually, those tools and templates, you give those out for free as well. And I think that's fantastic. But then you've written about it as well. So let's talk about books and talk about Strategize. You've just re-released that. So let's talk a little bit about the first edition of it, and then why you've re-released it, what you've added to it. So
yeah, thanks for asking, Tony. And I mean, this is a great opportunity for me to show off
here's what we prepared earlier.
That's it. Yes, yeah. So yeah, a few people asked me, why did you release a new edition? The first one wasn't that bad, was it? But I published the first edition of Strategize in 2016, I believe, and since then I've continued to work in the space of strategy and product strategy, and so I just felt that for me, some of my thinking had evolved. Some of the approaches that I use and that I recommend and that I teach have evolved, and I just wanted to kind of update the book to avoid that it there's a discrepancy between what I now teach and what I now say and what's written in this book. And I've wanted to add new material, so I wanted to add an introduction that describes, for instance, describes hopefully more clearly the model that I've developed and I've sketched earlier. I wanted to add more information around guiding stakeholders and development teams. I wanted to add more information around making strategic decisions in a collaborative fashion. I essentially rewrote the whole product roadmap part. I wanted to use some new examples, update some of the illustrations, and I decided to change the structure to make the content a little bit more accessible. So in the end, I made more changes to the book than I originally envisioned. Originally, it was really about, oh yeah, there's a few elements that I'd like to update, and I'd like to just, as I said, really bring in line with my current thinking. And then this is how it started, and that was mainly in the product roadmap chapter. And then that essentially turned into a rewrite, and then I moved on to the strategy part, but what has now become the strategy chapters, and and change those, change the text in there, to a much larger extent than I originally envisioned. But I guess that's the way it sometimes goes, right? It's a little bit like refactoring a code base or updating a digital product, right? You start somewhere and you think like, yeah, okay, maybe you've done some code analysis and like there's some code complexity. Let's refactor the code here, let's add something there, and then you move on. You think like, well, actually, now that I've changed it here, I should also change it over there. There's a real opportunity to improve something there. And so I thought like, well, I'll try and get it as up to date as I can. Who knows when I have again the opportunity to work on it. So hopefully it'll last for another 5-6 years at least. And hopefully it'll be helpful for people. So.
Oh, look, and I've had the pleasure of reading it, and I would say, so I do product owner training. I've been doing that for some time, and some of those seminal books. This is one of those books that I always give or talk to product owners to take away with them, because it actually tells you how to do some things when you hit the ground. Because we can only, when you do training, it's only North Star. You can only tell everybody what it's meant to look like as good as you possibly can. You can interweave as many stories, but when you get back to your workplace, how do you put that thing into action? How do you actually make it happen? And what I love the way you wrote the original Strategize, and then you followed on, is you actually weave the stories of how you actually do the work. And I think that's a really important thing. So thank you from my part for updating it, because I think that's fantastic.
Oh, that's very nice of you to say. It's great to hear. Thank you, Tony. Lovely to hear.
One of the things that I wanted to touch on, just sort of following on from that then, is, so we sort of talked about the current state of product ownership and where it is, and some tools and etc. But I think that brings to us to that point of thinking, okay, well, where's it headed? Like, it's going to have to evolve. We know we've all heard the VUCA, and we've all heard the environment's moving faster and faster. It is, even with remote. it's changed the landscape of those things. Where's it heading, and how do you see it evolving as we go forward, Roman? Because you're really in that seat where you're seeing this a lot.
Yeah, it's a good question. I wish I had a crystal ball and could tell you precisely and correctly.
You know what you say today, we'll be able to look at it in a couple of years and go, was he right?
That's it. Hey. Yeah, don't hold me accountable for anything I'm saying now. Well, we talked about empowerment. We talked about sort of viewing the product owner as primarily a delivery-focused tactical role, and that's maybe a mistake, or it's not always maybe the right way to look at the role. That's at least what I would say. But I think to a certain extent, it's also true for any product role. When I go and speak to, I mentioned Rich Miller and other people of the product management community who aren't maybe quite as connected to the agile space as I am, and then some of the conversations we have and some of the problems I hear people struggle with are very much around, I'm meant to be the product manager, I'm meant to be in charge of the product, I'm meant to make hear decisions of that product and ensure it creates as much value as possible, but I'm being held back. And I mean, I've worked a number of organizations where traditional product managers were used, or a more traditional product manager role was applied, and the leadership team, or in some cases the managing director, the CEO, would make the key product decisions. And so one of the things that I think will have to happen is that product management is further recognized as a key function within the enterprise in order to create value on a sustained basis. And no matter if we're now talking about digital products or non-digital products, but I do think that product management isn't as established in many organizations as, say, sales, marketing, or support, or operations, and other business groups. And to a certain extent, that's also due to the age, I guess, of product management as a profession. And depending on who you believe, some people say like, oh, product management started in the 20s and 30s. But personally, I believe the stories that seem to suggest that product management started to crawl out of marketing and engineering in the 1950s. And in the digital space, it's even worse. I think that one of the first companies to have software product managers was Microsoft in sort of the early mid 1980s. So it's not we don't have hundreds of years of experience. We're not as established as maybe the IT or software engineering or software development department. And so, yeah, I do hope that, the recognition that we need professional product people, and we need product people who have a certain respect and a certain empowerment within the organization, that's going to increase, no matter if those individuals are then called product owners, product managers, product leaders, product X, Y, Z. So for me, it's that's a really big, it's a big challenge, and again, a big hope for the future that that's going to improve.
Yeah. So taking that forward and thinking about everything we've talked about today, if I'm a product owner or a new product owner watching this, so I'm going to put you on the spot, what would be the top 3 tips that you would give them to start to move in the right direction?
Top 3 tips. So in order to move forward, I always find it's helpful to understand, why am I right now? So, what's the spot you're in right now? And in terms of what is your current role, you might be called a product owner. That's cool. But in some cases, I find that people who introduce themselves as product owners, after chatting to them, actually own less than a product. Sometimes I find somebody owns a feature in terms of an end user facing capability. Think of an online retail store with a search navigation capability. That might be a feature, for instance. So that's a part of a product, or a component in terms of an architecture building block, like a layer or subsystem. And so then you might be called a product owner, but you don't own a product, you own a product part. Now that's not nothing bad at all. It's not meant to be judgmental in any way or make anybody feel uncomfortable. I think it's just important to be honest. And I sometimes also talk about people who say, I'm a product owner, but find out they own more than a product. They actually own a product suite. They own a group of products, a product portfolio. And then you're not, in a way, a product owner, you're a product portfolio owner, or a product suite owner. And again, I think it's important to recognize that, because it means you've actually got greater responsibility than somebody who owns a single product. So be clear on what you currently own. and be clear on what decisions you currently make. If you own a product, do you own that product in its entirety? Do you have full stack ownership? Do you have partial ownership? Are you more focused maybe on the tactical product decisions? So that's the first thing. And then the second thing in terms of understanding where you are right now is reflect on your current knowledge and skills. What are your strengths and what are areas for improvement where maybe you don't know much about, maybe certain aspects of product strategy or product road mapping, or maybe your knowledge around key performance indicators and product metrics is there, but it's maybe not as deep as it could be. So those are then areas for improvement. And then think about where you'd like to go. What's the product role that you aspire to, that you'd like to move into? And what are the skills that are required in order to succeed in that job? And hopefully that'll then put you in a position to say, like, okay, this is the role I currently have. This is the role I'm aspiring to. These are the skills I currently have. These are the skills I need. So let's make a plan. Let's figure out how I can move from A to B. Maybe that's something that isn't kind of straightforward in the sense that it's just a simple, I'll just apply for that role and that's it. Maybe it's if you currently own a feature, a product capability, then the next step is maybe to take on a smaller product, but a whole product, and have full stack ownership of a smaller product. And maybe then you're in a position to move into a more demanding product role and manage a larger product that is maybe more important for the business, and possibly also then lead a team of product people. So, sometimes you have to think about intermediate steps and kind of try and plan out a little bit your journey towards the job you really want to do, you really aspire to. So that'd be probably my advice. I think that might be more than 3 tips.
Yeah, just a couple. That's all right. I'm sure no one's going to complain. No, that's fantastic. Look, we're really close to the end of our time. Believe it or not, it's rolling on very quickly. Roman, how can people get involved with you? How can they find some of those tools and touch base with you?
Yeah, so if you'd like to check out my work and maybe see if some of the templates tools that I've developed are helpful for you, then please head over to my website, romanpichler.com. I also write the blog for product people. There's a podcast, which is largely an audio version of the articles that I write. You get links to my YouTube channels, my books are on there, and other pieces of information. So check it out, and hopefully you'll find it helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. If you're listening to this and you like this, don't forget, like, subscribe so we can keep this thing going. By all means, come and join us in our Remote Agility Framework community. We've just opened that up on Circle. You can find that at remoteaf.co, and then just click the community button. A lot of like-minded people looking and listening and thinking about how we're going to work in the remote and the hybrid. Again, thank you so much for being on all the remote things today, Roman.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me. It was really nice talking to you, and I hope for everyone watching and listening, it was a little bit helpful.
Thank you so much.